everyone, welcome to this video on preparing and conducting interviews. In this video we will focus on how to produce a proper interview guide in preparation of interviews. We will also discuss how to conduct such an interview. Rick has already told you a lot about qualitative data collection and the different types of interviews. Now it's time to think about what it actually means to prepare an interview. So, for any interview, whether structured, semi-structured or unstructured, an interview guide is necessary. It ensures that you ask the right questions and ask all the questions you would like to have answers to in order to answer your research question. Let's have a look at what an interview guide looks like. Well, it starts with an introduction in which you tell your prospective interviewee about yourself, your research, and indicate the time the interview will take. You also explain that the data from the interview will be treated confidentially, and you ask the consent of the respondent to actually be interviewed. At this point, also ask whether the respondent wants their interview to be treated anonymously, and whether you may use their responses in your thesis. Then, you ask permission to make an audio recording of the interview. By recording, you can fully concentrate on the interview and keep eye contact. The recording is later necessary for transcribing and analyzing the information from the interview, but you will learn more about that next week. After your introduction, the interview actually starts. Now, it's important to think about the build-up of the questions. You start with easy ones and then slowly move to more difficult or sensitive questions. Make sure you ask for descriptions, feelings, and perceptions. Then you end the interview with a neutral question and ask if the interviewee has anything else to add. At this point, also repeat what will happen with the data, and of course, don't forget to thank your interviewee. Now, let's dive deeper into how to phrase proper interview questions. It's best to formulate open questions. That means you avoid questions that can be answered with yes or no, and questions that require only a short answer. Open questions should invite people to tell their story. Some examples are, can you tell me? Or what do you think about? And what would you be able to explain me how? Also, make sure your questions are understandable to anyone. So refrain from using jargon, abbreviations, or ambiguous concepts that may be interpreted differently. If you ask your interviewee, how do you feel about the PRQS process in this particular WFCD program? Chances are that they will not understand or be able to answer properly. The last pitfall may be the use of leading questions. Leading questions influence the answer of the respondent and therefore skew the results. I suppose you feel really angry now. Can you tell me how angry you are? Is obviously a leading question, so avoid those. Okay, now you know how to phrase the questions, but how do you know which questions to ask? Well, you can actually use your operationalization for this. The indicators you developed are the basis of your questions. Usually, a good interview question touches several indicators. So don't think you need to formulate a question on every single indicator, but draft them so you can capture information on sets of indicators. A helpful tool during the interview may be to keep a checklist of the indicators, like Dorcas mentioned before. This way you can make sure all the indicators are touched upon, and you can ask additional questions about those that interviewees do not mention themselves. Now, there is a big difference between open interview questions, like in an interview guide, and the closed survey questions, like in a questionnaire. To demonstrate, we take garbage collection as an example. You want to learn more about the indicators, frequency, hygiene, and costs in a specific neighborhood. In a questionnaire, you would probably ask several closed-ended questions per indicator to get the information you need. For an interview, you could capture these in one or two open questions, as shown here. Okay, I think that is all you need to know about preparing an interview guide. Now, imagine you actually sit down with your first respondent, which you have carefully selected through purposive sampling. Pick a time and place that is convenient for your respondent and where they feel safe. Then you start the interview. Exciting, huh? I'll give you some tips about how to conduct this interview. The most important part of an interview is that you build trust with the person you're interviewing. This is what we call rapport. You establish this already at the start of your interview when you tell the introduction. You have prepared this in your interview guide, so no problem there. To create rapport, the interviewer should always show genuine interest, but also display encouraging body language, like eye contact, smiling, and leaning forward. Show that you're an active listener, and also try to mirror the interviewee's language in terms of vocabulary, but also formal or more informal styles. Then you start with the neutral questions according to your interview guides. Your own attitude is important here. Listen carefully and show interest. Slowly then move to more difficult or sensitive questions. Keep listening carefully and check whether you get the information on your indicators. Use the checklist. You can use probes and prompts to encourage your respondent to continue answering. Probes can be nonverbal, like dropping a silence to stimulate continuation, or leaning forward, as mentioned before. It can also be verbal, like using encouraging noises. Uh-huh. Oh yeah? Ah, I see. If you ask them what happened, this is a probe for continuation. Could you give an example? Is a probe for elaboration. And I don't understand what you said is used for clarification. If the interviewee starts to move off topic, you can steer the conversation by another probe, like, well, you mentioned before that. If you don't get enough information, ask follow-up questions or prompts. Examples are, what do you mean by X? Or can you explain more about? These are all tools that you can use during your interviews. Now, the last thing I want to mention is that sometimes you come across respondents that are reluctant to answer. This can be because they have no or little knowledge on the topic. However, it may also be due to a problem with the rapport. If the respondent is shy or, for example, does not trust the confidentiality, this will affect the rapport. Another element that might be of influence is a gender, age, or status interference between the interviewer and the interviewee. You may want to try to build a stronger rapport before continuing. But remember, the respondents may at any point take back their consent. Then you simply have to end the interview, and that's a shame. Please don't forget to always thank your respondents though. And in any case, give your respondent the option to receive your final report upon completion. Well, that's the end of this video. You've learned all the information necessary to prepare an interview with an interview guide and conduct an interview. If you keep these tips in mind, you should be able to conduct an excellent interview. Thank you for watching.